Welcome back to Lessons I Learned in Law. This week, I'm really excited to be joined by James Ryan, who is Chief Legal Officer and Chief Business Officer at BioNTech. So BioNTech, like I'm sure most of you know, was at the forefront of development of the COVID vaccines back in 2020, 2021. So we talk a lot about that, what it's like to work in that environment, the pressure, the all hands to the pump environment that was created there, and leading the legal team through those issues and the risks that the business was facing. James started out as a scientist. He moved into the legal profession. Works within the biotech and pharmaceutical space, so has some real deep industry knowledge. And we talk a bit about how he juggles that Chief Legal Officer role and the Chief Business Officer role, where he's focused on M&A and strategy and sitting on the execco. So loads in there to digest, hearing from a leader, and we have a star amongst us. He won General Counsel of the Year recently at an awards. So it's great to get his hot takes, and I hope you enjoy. Quick break to give you a few words from today's episode sponsor, Wordsmith. Now, most pieces of legal technology and AI now within the legal market, they're built mainly for law firms. Now, Wordsmith isn't. It's been specifically built with in-house legal teams in mind. Now, the general counsels, legal operations teams, basically the people that keep the business moving forward. So the idea is that your team and the AI agents that support it are all connected to the same picture for every job, so that they can work together to get it completed. So that legal stops being the bottleneck and starts being the thing that powers everything else in the business. It's a tool that's been built by former lawyers and technologists and has some of the sharpest minds working in the business right now. BT, the Financial Times, and Autoglass are already on it. So to find out more, head over to wordsmith.ai. Hi James, welcome to Lessons I Learned in Law.
Hi Scott, great to be here.
Great to have you. I've given an introduction as best as I can. But if we could start just by giving a bit of an overview of your current role, team size in the business, and then we'll jump into the lessons and all the stuff that's got you there as well.
Sure, great. No, happy to. So I'm now Chief Legal Officer and Chief Business Officer at BioNTech, and I sit on the management board. I joined BioNTech in July 2018 and joined the board in September 2023 as Chief Legal Officer, and then picked up the Chief Business Officer role as well, kind of middle of last year. So I'm just over a year into that role. And, yeah.
I can imagine that's it's giving you a lot more to chew on then. So BioNTech, obviously a business or a brand that people, I'd imagine most people are aware of, given what happened during those COVID years. But tell us a bit about that role into the business role, the role outside of law. So how that came around, and what that entails beyond the legal remit.
Yeah, sure. No, so I joined BioNTech in 2018. At that point, Sean was Chief Business Officer. And in one of those fortuitous things in life, Sean had been one of my first clients as a qualified lawyer. He was one of the business team at Laurantis. And one of my first deals as a qualified lawyer was advising Sean on a deal he was doing. That was kind of took 6 months in 2005. And then that company ended up being sold. He moved away and did other things, didn't talk to him for years. Went for my interview at BioNTech, and Sean walked in the room. He's like, "Oh, I remember you," and that was that. So we had a long, like, aged history of doing deals together. And then at BioNTech, he was Chief Business Officer, and we ended up, one of my first jobs when I got there, literally a week after I joined, he walks in, slams down the contract on my desk and goes, "We're off to London. We've got negotiations with Pfizer on this new deal. it's really vital we get this across the line by the end of the month. And we did that deal, and it started from there. We fast forward in that we worked on the IPO together, the Neon acquisition, and then it was into the pandemic, and the two of us literally worked on the COVID deal with Pfizer. So since starting at BioNTech, I was working on the deals, and it was a natural transition as Sean retired that I kind of picked up that remit as well.
What type of business was it then that you were stepping into, and like pre it becoming a household name, which I guess isn't common.
Yeah. So when I joined BioNTech was just over 300 people. At the time, I described it as a glorified research institute. It was very heavily into the science. It had programs in early clinical development. The legal team was me and two others. The IP team was 4 or 5 IP managers, and that was it. That was what I stepped into. And at that point, pretty much no one had heard of BioNTech. I was approached to consider joining, and I thought I knew the European biotech world quite well, having worked in it since 2004. And I've never heard of this company. Who on earth am I being approached by? What's this about? And I did my research on what I could see, and then I realised it was large parts of my PhD research, kind of writ large in a biotech. It was like, this is fascinating. This is
right.
This could be really good, or it could be an absolute failure. But this looks really exciting. I want to find out more, and that's how I got into BioNTech. And I joined, and it really was heavily into the research. It was heavily oncology focused. We were working really hard on the personalized cancer vaccines and that side of things. And the idea that we were going to, detour and go off into kind of full-on infectious disease research in record time was just not on the horizon.
Nice. I might put myself up for getting shot here, but you might just be the first guest on the podcast that's got the PhD. So you touched on that. So want to hear more about that, and your background was in science, obviously. With that
So my undergraduate degree was in experimental pathology, and at the end of that, for my undergraduate research project, I started work in what was an RNA lab, looking at a novel protein they'd identified in a library they were creating. And I found it really interesting. Worked on that as an undergraduate, and then they said, "We've got space for a PhD student. Would you like to carry on the project?" And I did. So stayed there, carried on working another 3 years. Got about 2 years through it, and thought, this isn't the long-term thing for me. Love the science. Love the science. Find it really interesting, but spending the rest of my life in the lab and trying to chase kind of postdoc contracts, not for me. What else can I do? And I looked at being a patent attorney and decided that wasn't right for me either. And then went to a family wedding, bumped into one of my cousins, many cousins. Cousin's partner was in graduate recruitment in law. And she said, "Well, why don't you apply for law and do a training contract? We're crying out for people that haven't got a history or law degree background." And I did, and I got a training contract, and that was it.
Nice.
Came into law.
And always had, when you were looking, because it's fairly common for people that work within biotech and pharma to have some element or something certainly that's sought after by clients that we work with the scientific background. But were you particularly looking at firms that had, or appealing to firms that had the practice within that space?
I think training contract, it is a case of it's finding where there's space and hoping. A lot of firms have some level of pharma or biotech practice. The chances of getting that seat in your training contract and then any chance of qualifying into that area is always small. And I think for trainees, people doing law school, you take the opportunity you can get, and then you look to move into the area you find most interesting afterwards. That's what I did. I think I qualified, and within 3 days of qualifying, I handed in my notice to go and join a firm to do life sciences work. So I hadn't been able to find something until then. But it really won. And I enjoyed the training contract. I enjoyed doing other things and seeing different things. But yeah, I moved into advising biotechs in 2004 and have been kind of in that area ever since. I think I spent half my career in private practice, half now in-house.
Nice. Yeah. Cool. And what about at that time, like peers in the academic space and parents, I guess, that have supported? How did they feel about the switch into law?
And my PhD supervisor was very understanding. He's like, "Yeah, this isn't you, James. That's fine. Don't worry. I understand."
Right.
And my mum was, I don't know. No, mum was really pleased. Mum was really pleased. So I was raised in a one-parent family. My dad died when I was 8.
Right.
And she was like, "Your dad would be so proud of you making this change." So no, it was all viewed very positively. But I was a little bit nervous at the time. I finished my PhD and thinking, that's it, no more written exams ahead in my life, thank God. And it was like, I've got 2 years more of written exams now. Yeah. But thankfully that was
you switch out.
Yeah.
No additional elective studies since then that you've jumped into?
No, I'm done. I'm done with studies and exams. I'm done.
Yeah. I've got friends that are doctors that are still and surgeons that they still seem to have moments in their life where they've got they're in the right in the mix of the next exam set. It's I guess it's the trade-off, right? But cool. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I think we'll touch on more of that as we go through. But keen to jump in and hear your first lesson, if you could share that with me.
Sure. I mean, it's probably not very original, but for me, one of the first lessons for a lawyer, private practice, in-house, senior, junior, is to be curious. I think the starting point is your advice is only ever as good as the facts and your understanding of the situation. So the more you can ask questions, the more you can understand the client's business, what they're trying to achieve, the ins and outs, the better your advice is going to be. And a lot of the time, I always found in private practice that you'd have clients giving you the facts they wanted you to know. And you needed to dig and ask questions to really understand, to get to everything that you really needed to know in order to really give the advice they needed. So for me, being curious and asking questions, it allows you to give the best advice you can, to really understand what the objective is or what they're trying to achieve. And then, just being able to do things that way. I think in terms of relationship management, and this is where I always found it interesting, because I was working in life sciences. I had clients, lots of founder scientists setting up companies, actually being interested in what they do and how they do it and why they're doing it. They're really, really happy to talk about it. They like their advisors to be engaged and to have a real interest in the business. It makes, for them, it moves away from they're just a service provider, to someone that has an interest in what I'm trying to do as well. And it just forms a relationship that, again, means you can give better advice and you understand more of the nuances and the things they're dealing with. That kind of being curious, asking questions, showing an interest in what they're doing, really starts to pay dividends in terms of relationship, information flow, and ability to do the job well. And I think in terms of career progression, curiosity for me is one of the drivers for development. So if I think back to my early career, and I spent, I don't know how many weeks or months in data rooms doing diligence on deals, acquisitions, IPOs, And lots of people saw it as a real chore and just something to get through and tick the box and get through as quickly as possible. Most of mine was done on kind of biotech companies. So I kind of geeked out a bit seeing science that no one else was seeing and understanding things in the pipeline that no one else was getting to see. And I found that interesting.
Yeah.
But I also saw it as, there's me at the start of my career. I'm seeing all these collaboration agreements that aren't in the public domain. I'm reading through them, thinking about the other work I'm doing, and just reading, a range of contracts of a similar type. And you're going through it and thinking, well, that's a really nice way of drafting that. I've not seen that before. That's quite clever. Just seeing the diligence exercise as a learning exercise to educate you as well as to provide a service for the client was something I actually quite enjoyed.
Yeah.
The curiosity was piqued.
Yeah.
You were seeing some fairly interesting cutting edge stuff, and you've got to read the contracts around the edge, and it just helps you get a better view of how your industry works.
Yeah, it's such a hard thing. It comes up so regularly in these conversations and conversations with clients, and also in other business conversations. In recruitment, it's such a important skill set to be curious about anyone you're talking with, businesses that you're working with. I think it really is a differentiator for all professions and walks of life, right? But like, how do you and I think you touched upon it there, but like the operation, if you're looking at some like a function, or you're functioning in a role, or you're doing a task, that, regardless of what it is, could be pretty boring if that's the only thing you look at it, rather than the bigger picture and that curiosity. Firstly, how much of it around the science thing do you feel attributable to your how much did the PhD teach you around that, like asking questions, and that's lent into your legal career?
Yeah, I think it taught me a lot, because science is about asking questions. It's not always questions you can answer, but it is especially at the research level, you're looking for answers to things that no one's looked at before. It's as much intellect as it is anything else. There's lots of, you get into the lab and there's lots of kind of dexterity and kind of precision with the instruments and trying to do the research. Behind it all is an inquisitive mind and a drive to solve problems and understand. And I think that translates quite well into science. I know law as a profession historically has been very much the domain of people with law degrees and history degrees, English. I think scientists have a huge amount to bring. The analytical approach, the stepwise approach to doing things is I think it translates very well into law and the approach you take with problem solving.
Yeah. And how do you assess, like we were touching on it before we were recording, having a trainee in the team through Flex, how do you assess curiosity amongst potential people that are joining your team or that are in your team?
Oh, for the trainee, poor guy, rounds and rounds of interviews of people, kind of trying to assess his interest and his desires and what kind of motivated him. And the feedback across the board was really, really positive. And I think having a trainee has been fantastic for the group. We've got quite a large number of English qualified lawyers now in the team. And having a trainee just seemed to unearth something in them about making sure he got the full training contract experience. And he spent time in court with the patent litigation. He spent time with the other litigators. He spent time looking at deals. He's had a really, really varied training contract with us. And he's now been seconded to one of our law firms to do some more hardcore work. And I said to him that it's really important. I said, look, it'd be really easy to get to the end of the training contract and just give you an offer and you roll into the in-house career and off you go. I said, it's really important you experience private practice and the different way of doing things there, the additional rigor that comes in private practice and the expectations of the clients when it's a external lawyer compared to in-house. I think it's really important you get to see two sides of the coin. So he's doing that. He seems to be really enjoying it, and it's been great having a trainee.
Yeah, nice. Sounds good. So, for anyone that's new to the show, this podcast is brought to you by Heriot Brown, and we're a specialist legal recruiter working with top legal teams throughout the world. Every week, we speak to hundreds of lawyers thinking about their careers, what that might look like in-house, and we also talk to companies that are looking to build legal teams from top talent. And this podcast is really just an extension of those conversations. So if you're curious about the market or building a legal team yourself, or what your next move might look like, then feel free to reach out to us. Our details are in the show notes. Thank you. And we'll jump on to lesson number 2.
Cool. So second lesson for me is to be objective. And I think this one, whether you're in-house or private practice, we're paid to do a job, and the job is to give the best advice we can, or to the best of our abilities. And this overlaps a bit with the curiosity, and you've got to have the information you need to give that advice. But then it's very much about, setting aside everything around it, the pressures, the desires, and really coming up with the advice you think the client needs to hear, rather than the advice that you probably know the client wants to hear. And there's always that pressure, I think. It's probably more often heard in-house than it is in private practice. There's always that pressure to give the response that someone wants. And you can break that down and say, well, let me know what outcome you want, and we can see if we can craft a way to get there, rather than as typical of, this is what we're going to do, and you're saying, but it just doesn't work. You can't do it that way, which then creates fireworks. And you've got to bring it back to, what are you trying to achieve? And we'll find ways for you to achieve that. It may not be that pathway you're asking us to bless. So there's a lesson of objectivity of, kind of really being calm, analytical, and trying to get to the right answer for the client, rather than giving them the precise answer they want. And it can be really difficult. Sometimes you come under enormous pressure to change your advice, to skew it in a way that gives the answer they want, or to allow them to do something. And I think for me, it's really important that you've got the confidence and you can find the space to sit back and just stay calm, reset, be objective. If you think what you're saying is right, and that is the answer in this situation, you've got to stick with it. And I think for 2 reasons. The first is, if you allow yourself to be pushed around and to change your position under pressure to suit what the client wants, it just undermines trust. And they start to think your advice isn't as good as it should be, or that you're not as confident in your advice as they would like. And that's bad. And I think also it's, people need to realise that we are just one voice of many. Especially in-house, you're asked for your advice, your input, you give it. You're one of many people giving input on a topic. And the client hasn't got to take your advice. Ultimately.
When's been, I can imagine, I can imagine there's been some, for what you can share, but I'd imagine there's been some of that challenge, and being in a position where you have to challenge during those years with the Pfizer collaboration and post as well. Like, has there been times where you've pushed, or you've felt is there any stories you can share in terms of a real position of challenge?
Not so much around that. I remember when I first joined BioNTech, and I joined as a VP and was spending a lot of time with management and other senior people. And I had the conversation with Sean, who I was reporting to, and we were having the discussion around reporting lines and identity of the client, and who I had to run my advice past, and who ultimately I was advising. And I was going along with saying, yeah, Sean, I report to you, team reports to you as part of your remit. Understood. Yes, the advice will mainly be given to you. I said, but I need to be really clear. and this is in the first week to join us, I need to be really clear that there will come times where, I won't be giving the advice to you. I'll probably be going straight to the supervisory board because there will be some issue with management. And in that case, I'm not advising management because they're not representing the client. I'm talking to the supervisory board because in that circumstance, that's the right. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah. I said, you can see it as a reporting line, but you've got to accept that you've now hired a senior lawyer. And, in many ways, the legal team is going to be quasi-independent. We're going to give the advice we need to give. That will normally be to the supervisory board. But if the time comes where that's not right, we'll go around or above you. And you need to accept that that's our role. And it's like, you're punchy. I'm like, yeah, but that's but that's how it needs to be. And that's, it's just explaining what it means now to have a seasoned, proper legal team in place about how the things flowed. And as I say, a couple of weeks into living in Germany, a couple of weeks in the first job, to be tackling things like that, it's a lesson in
baptism of fire.
Yeah, it's staying objective, it's staying calm, explaining the position, and finding ways, and it worked fine. And there were never really any issues, so that was out of the way quite early.
Yeah, it seems like a far better way of approaching it than that being in the back of your mind and then having to have that conversation or having to go through that going around without being upfront about it, and people's expectations are managed, and you're setting the tone. Like that objectivity, and now you're in that position of board member and the business role, the business development position.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself wearing two hats in that? Is there a different approach when you're looking at things from the CLO role, or is it how does it work?
There is. I mean, a lot of it is strategy. We want to make a deal. What's the objective of the deal? What's our strategy? What are the must-haves? Where's their flexibility? How are we going to approach this? And in that, the legal and the business development kind of go hand in hand. That there isn't too much difference.
For lawyers, some lawyers I speak to or have heard where they maybe that not ignoring the advice, but not taking the advice or following it to the letter is interpreted as, or could be interpreted as, well, legal isn't respected within this business, or they don't listen. Legal's not got a seat at the table. Like, what would you say to? How would you counter that?
I would say, well, certainly with BioNTech, legal has certainly got a seat at the table.
Yeah,
I think there is more of a nuance to that, and we've had the debate. I've had the debate with Ugo about whether decision making is led by the business or whether it's led by the lawyers. And it's very much its decisions are made by the business with the appropriate input from others. I don't think it's disrespectful. I don't think it's diminishing the role of the legal team. But there's a lot of factors at play. We see our side of it. We see the big picture. But if you did everything, in the most kind of risk managed way, you would probably lose opportunities, and that's and that's the flip side. It is a balance. It's trying to find that happy balance of, I would rather you didn't, but if you're going to, here are the steps you need to take as well to kind of to manage the risk. You'd rather see those steps put in place rather than totally ignored. But you can't expect everything you say to be taken 100%, because as I said, it's one voice of many. There's lots of factors to consider, and our view is it's just one of them. I mean, there's obviously a red
hmm
line, if the advice is no, you can't do that, it's illegal.
When did you first get like exposure to that that thought process, or how a business interprets the legal advice that you're given? Do you feel have you was there a time where you felt, all right, I now see how legal advice is interpreted, applied, or
Yeah,
disregarded, or
yeah. I mean,
is some parts of it taken
yeah,
off?
I was quite lucky because even when I was in private practice, I had three secondments into industry.
Right.
Um, one to
Yeah.
a biotech company for 6 months, one to a pharma company for 6 months, and to a medical device company. So even before I made the
Okay.
transition out of private practice, I'd kind of seen a number of companies in the sector and how they operated, and the differences and nuances, and struggles of legal teams to you know pitch their advice in the
hmm
right way, to be heard, to kind of make sure what they were saying was considered.
hmm
So I think it was something that was just kind of woven through my early years as a lawyer.
hmm
Compared to other industries, biotechnology is a high risk industry. The rate of success of companies is relatively low. The rate of success
hmm
of product developments is relatively low. Every single one of those is taking a risk. Um,
hmm
and given the cost of product development, quite a big financial risk. So,
hmm
for that industry, looking at the big picture, a discussion around, should the CDA be worded this way or that way, and the risks associated, it doesn't even register for a lot of them on the risk
hmm
scale they're looking at, because
hmm
it's just background noise to the real risks they're dealing with of, is this clinical trial going to come in on time? Is it going to come in on budget? Is it going to show the
hmm
data needed to get to the next funding milestone, et cetera, et cetera? And so your advice has to be, and you've got to be mindful that you're advising into a spectrum where the risks the
hmm
company is facing are real and near term. And if you're raising theoretical or kind of minor, remote risks, it's not going to have much attention paid to it, because they're worrying about the next
hmm
3 months, 6 months, a year, and that's something that, if it comes to be, is probably 5 years away.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's long term. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And you've come fresh from a conference today, representing the business. What are the, like, post COVID, like how is BioNTech? What's the focus, and I guess that longer term plan?
Yeah, so the focus now is is fully back onto oncology. We did a
hmm
big thing the summer with BMS on a new product
hmm
candidate. So the focus is on getting the clinical studies for that ramped up and moving,
hmm
making sure that relationship's being well managed and everyone's happy, and yeah, getting everything kind of
hmm
switched on and everyone's focused. Which
Right.
again it's a nice
Yeah.
addition to the legal side, to be kind of
hmm
moving on to that side and making sure that company performance is going the direction it needs to go in.
hmm And does it for legal, does that then is it a different type of skill set, a different type of different focus in what you're looking at as business as usual?
It's yeah, I mean, it brings different teams in. Obviously, with the deal negotiation, we had some of the in-house deal team kind of working on the
hmm
contract negotiations and putting it together, um, and they will stay involved throughout the life of the contract, because they were there for the negotiations. They understand it. They know how we got
hmm
to the positions we got. And then we'll bring in some more of the kind of R&D focused legal team to support clinical trials and the research that's going on, and all the contracting that's needed to support now the next phase of activity. And then as we
hmm
expand manufacturing activities, etc., we'll get more of that side of the business and those lawyers involved, and it all kind of builds in, with different
hmm
bits of the group kind of working on different aspects of the whole relationship. And we'll have the kind of
hmm
like lead deal lawyer kind of there in the centre, making sure that everyone understands what the contract parameters are around each of those. So we're all going in the right direction, and they'll coordinate with the business development and alliance management team to make sure everything's happening and the relationship's healthy from that side. So it becomes quite a big web of trying to coordinate all the different kind of lines of information and activity to make sure it's firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, nice. And how much? What's the split in terms of your role of that? Like how much legal work versus on the business? Business role?
I think it's transitioning. To be honest with you, it's going from being 100% legal and IP to, I guess it's coming down towards 50-50, and I suspect it will move more towards the business in time.
Nice. How do you prepare for that? Like for yourself, how is it in terms of upskilling and learning new things?
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to a lot of the first lesson. It really is. You can see it as getting out of your comfort zone, or you can see it as another area of growth, and just the interest of what's happening over here. How does this new area of law apply? What do I know about that? How can I get sufficiently up to speed on that fast enough? And I think really that's the joy of the in-house job. It's unlike private practice where you tend to be in your swim lane, you're doing a very specific type of work, and you'd become absolutely expert in that specific area. As much as my teams have an area of focus, it's not 100%. They will cross into other areas from time to time. There will be new challenges. Sometimes the work goes to who's got the capacity at that point to take it up, and you're forever working on things that you've never seen before. If I'd stayed as just a deal lawyer from private practice, I joined getting the company ready for a NASDAQ IPO. That wasn't, although I'd done some kind of capital markets and kind of NASDAQ work at my prior company, I certainly never got a company ready for an IPO before. And I certainly wasn't aware going into that, of all the difficulties and nuances and issues about a German company going for a NASDAQ IPO and all the things you had to do. And you could see it as this isn't me, I know nothing about this, I'm the wrong person, or you can see it as I need to learn something about this. I need to do some reading. I need to prepare. I need to find out who I can ask questions of. I need to get up to speed. And I think, since joining BioNTech, a lot of my job has been that kind of, I need to understand more. I need to find out about these other areas of law I've never looked at before and find the right people to advise. And it comes back to that lesson one of the curiosity. And I don't think if you haven't got that, it's kind of limiting. And it's a little bit scary at first to start going off into those areas that you haven't trained in. But I think very much the in-house job is that. And if you look at general counsels and why they're called that, it is because the more senior you get, the more you're expected to know about these issues, to a level where you're not dangerous and can call in the right experts when it gets to the point where you're really uncomfortable. But your job as a general counsel is general counselling. You're not just a deal lawyer. You're not just a competition lawyer, etc. That's maybe at the heart of your training and background and what you enjoy doing. But you end up being pushed in all sorts of directions, and you respond to that by remaining curious and picking up new skills and information.
No, I love how it all comes back. It does all come back to that, and asking questions and asking the right people the right questions as well. And it's a difficult thing to feign, right? It's really difficult. It's something that you can't. You have to be engaged in the subject matter, or be engaged in where it's going to take you, or the unopened door, or into the unknown. Is there a time where you felt, the business, because again, a lot of people will be looking at this and saying, right, stepped into this non-legal roles. That's something I would love to do at some point in time. Is there a point or a pivot where you felt I'm been looked at not just as the lawyer in the room here, or is there any sort of signals around that?
Yeah, I think you just start getting asked for your views and opinions on things that are legal matters. Um, and I
Hmm.
find, with Sean and Ugo and some of the board members, we were having discussions around, strategy and other directions and things the company should do. And
Hmm.
there wasn't an iota of legal advice in there. It was really, what's your opinion, James? What do you think? What do you
Hmm.
think about doing this? What do you think about doing that? And it was around that level, where the discussion about joining the board came along, and then from there,
Hmm.
it's kind of evolved into the business role as well as the legal.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think actually looking at it, it's not an untrodden route. There are, if you dig,
Hmm.
there's a number of senior BD and chief business officers with legal backgrounds or
Hmm.
experience in as lawyers before they've made that change. Um,
Hmm.
it's slightly unusual, I think, to hold on to both, but we'll see how that goes.
Hmm. Yeah. Work cut
Yeah.
out, for sure. To the lawyers out there listening, you guys are often brilliant, fantastic at solving other people's problems. But what I find is that you can be less deliberate about explaining that value and the value that you bring to those relationships. Our programme, our CPD accredited course, the Executive Council Accelerator, is designed to help you with that problem. Showing you how to be your own internal and external marketing and sales function for your legal team and your own legal work. So if you're thinking about how to make progress and take that next step internally or externally from your organisation, then check out the link in the show notes below. Thank you. All right, we'll jump in lesson 3. Conscious
Yeah,
of your time.
sure. Lesson 3 really is just to remember that everyone's human. Things do go wrong. Things always go wrong in companies. Things go wrong in private practice. Everyone's got stories of, kind of mistakes they've made and had to fix. But it's always easier to fix those things if you know about them early. And if you've got to the point where you're seen as this absolutely, objectivity above everything else, inhuman, unapproachable legal team or lawyer, people won't come and talk to you about those things because they're scared of what the response is going to be. Whereas if you've got to give the advice, you've got to behave in the right way to make sure you're giving the appropriate advice, but you've got to find a way to portray your humanity and that, you're a real person, you've got interests outside work, you don't just talk about law. And that they can talk to you about other things, and if they've got concerns or they think there's been a mistake, that they're prepared to come and talk to you or the team early to raise that and talk it through, rather than trying to sweep it under the carpet or leave it till right at the end, because it's one of those typical situations of the sooner you know about it, the greater the range of solutions you've got, and the greater the range of costs associated with that there are. The later it's left, your range of solutions has shrunk right down, and the ones that are left are normally the really, really expensive ones. So you want to kind of encourage that kind of early engagement and have a team that is fun to talk to, can be engaged with. They feel they're going to get a compassionate ear, and someone's going to listen to the story behind it, rather than just looking at the facts and coming up with a decision that's purely objective and ignores a lot of the human elements behind these things. Because again, if you're curious and you ask the questions and you look into it, 9 times out of 10, this isn't malicious. It's someone being pushed beyond their limit. It's someone that's worked a horrendously long time or hasn't been given the support they need, and they've made a mistake. And that's unfortunate and regrettable. And, the answer isn't to, kind of point fingers and blame, etc. It's to fix it and then work out what could be done better next time to make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen again. And to move more. Because to take any other approach, it's just breaking down the relationship between the lawyers, the legal team, and the rest of the company. So it's really, everyone's human. We've got to be human. We've got to appear human. We've got to expect, and allow for the rest of the business to be human. And we need this two-way dialogue.
Yeah.
Even in private
How did?
practice, if it's that same thing, that if I'm going through an exercise with the team and we're thinking about who to instruct on something new, and it's a new area and we haven't got a panel or people to deal with on that before, and the team will go off and they'll have their panel interviews and their assessments and come back with a recommendation. You can pretty much guarantee now that whoever you talk to is going to be technically competent. That's a given. You can kind of predict that based on a range of firms, they will have different ways of working with you or working on a matter, and there's a slight preference. Well, I like approaching it that way. I'm not so keen on that one, and that's just how does that team operate type thing. And it would typically come down to one or two firms, and the team would go, we don't know who to pick. And it comes back to that thing. Well, have you spoken to the partners? Yes. Do you know, have they introduced the associates that are absolutely working on your matters that you'll be dealing with day to day? Yes. What do you think of them? Well, we had a good laugh with that team in the process, and they seem really nice. The conversation was a bit more awkward and stilted with the lead partner, and say, well, I'm going to ask you the age-old question. If you're in negotiations with them for a week, locked in a room or a hotel, or if you've got to talk to them every day, for the next 3 months, which one would you rather deal with? And then they're like, "Is that one?" Yeah. They're really quick and say, "Well, it's that." Yeah. And it's like, well, the decision's made because if you want to get the work done and you want to enjoy your work and you want to feel you're making progress, then that probably is the decision-making thing between the two. And it's not silly. It's people. It's humans. It's relationships, and that's really important. And I think it's really important that private practice understands that we want to work with you. We want to enjoy working with you. Working every hour God sends to get your legal skills to the top notch is fine. We applaud it. But we want you to do something else as well. We want you to be able to, when the pens are down, to have a conversation about what you did last weekend, about something, so that we can engage on a personal level, because that's really important. Because we're trying to build a long-term relationship, and we want to feel there's some kind of connection. Because then
you're far more likely to get to them.
And I think that also for lawyers themselves, it goes to the quality of advice you give. I mean, you raised the COVID years. The COVID years were absolutely brutal for us. I know they were bad for other people who were short of work and were concerned about their jobs. I wouldn't give that up for anything. The experience of doing that, and the commitment and the way the company pulled together. And the way we got it done was absolutely tremendous, but I would not want to do it again. The supervisory board, that's great. So what are we doing next year? And I was like, I don't know, but I'm going to find someone else in the team to take the next one, because I'm definitely not capable of doing that again. But that really drove home for me in terms of, there are periods in your life. There will be periods in any lawyer's life where they're working really hard, like unbelievably hard. But there comes a time when you need to take some time for yourself. You need some downtime. You need family time. You need time to go off and do whatever sport you like doing, reading books, watching films, seeing family, friends. You've got to do that. You've got to recharge. You've got to reset your head and find your balance again, because that helps you maintain the objectivity for what comes next. And actually, I find if I go off and do something else, for me, it's climbing. If I can go off climbing, and I can spend the time, on a climbing wall outside. It's more climbing wall these days than outside. But if I can go and do that, and I can go and enjoy myself and push myself, I can't think about anything else when I'm up there. Yeah, it's just how balanced am I? What's my next move? Am I going to make it? Is this form going to be really embarrassing? Getting to the top. It's all encompassing. I'm totally focused. I cannot think about anything else. But after a long session of that, I quite often find that I'll be relaxing, and then the ideas and thoughts that I need to solve a problem that I've been stuck on just suddenly appear. And it's that away time, it's that downtime that really helps. And I think, again, we're lawyers, yes, but we are humans. We all need that break and that chance to reset. And I think that's another important part of this lesson, is to listen to when you need to do that side of things.
Yeah. Nice. I think that, it's really, really valuable. I think that subconscious just ticking over and the answers coming is a really good point. When you spent time in Germany, what was the climbing scene there?
Really good. Yeah, really, really good. Yeah. Before lockdown, so my daughter's a far better climber than me. I'm far more enthusiastic climber. We lived about 5 miles from the local climbing wall. And pre-lock, and they were open quite late. They were open to about 10 o'clock at night. And we were finding that pre-lockdown, we were getting there 3 times a week. It's absolutely brilliant. It might have just been bouldering rather than climbing up in the tall walls, but just spending an hour, incredible for, kind of recovering from work. Really great physical workouts. Great way of controlling weight, and a good way to spend time with her and kind of do something we both enjoy together. But no, in Germany, climbing I think has always been a far more mainstream sport than it is in the UK. UK's, is much more popular now than it was when I started. But Germany's has always been, a large part of, what community activities.
Yeah, nice. What's your favourite? What are the two films? It's the Dawn Wall and the other. The other one escapes
Free
me.
Solo.
Which was your
Free Solo?
That's it. Yeah,
that's good.
Which is your favourite out of those two?
I like Free Solo. I couldn't do it. That kind of complete ability to be single-minded and not see the risk, have no fear. It's just incredible. That absolute belief in your own abilities.
Yeah, it's nuts. Yeah, it's crazy. It's been a few years since I watched it, but it's amazing. But it's been great, great chatting. I think amazing perspective on the how the career has evolved from the science background and that chance conversation at a wedding to where you are today and all the experiences. I'm sure we could talk for a lot longer on those 2021 years, but exciting times ahead in that business role and other opportunities for the legal team as well. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thanks, Phil.
It's been great chatting.
All right.
Thank you, James.
All right.
And cheers.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Lessons I Learned in Law. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast or you've taken something from any of the insights shared by today's guest, then please give the show a follow or a subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And please head over to the Lessons I Learned in Law LinkedIn page and give us a follow. It really does help the podcast travel and get out to the wider legal community and can help shape someone's legal career. Thank you.